All right, so we're back, and I just wanted to let you know now, if you're in the series of watching this, I'll try and post this in the week by week as well. But I just made the executive decision as I look through the chapter. To me, it is more important that you get this direct behavioral information because when I was looking through the textbook, I'm covering some of the elements, and then this chapter's in the textbook's fairly broad to the point where I would rather you spend the time and I go a little bit over on this, but you don't have to read. So I'm compensating for you. But I think this is really crucial. So you don't have to read. You obviously can. You can go through and skim it and see maybe what they would have said about it. But I think this is really, really crucial to have. So let's go ahead and get started. So in the last video, we had talked about the 4 different types of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. So went through a couple of examples. I really wanted you to know what's happening for each one, and I broke that down for you. But now let's get into a few specific examples. I'm just going to roll through these. Once again, if you have questions, please let me know, and I'd be happy to walk through this or talk you through it again through Zoom. So first thing, this is the first one, is positive reinforcement. So we know that positive means to add, reinforcement means to increase the behavior. So we're adding something to increase a behavior. Positive reinforcement is an example of that would be to the student remains seated for the entire lesson, which is the behavior. So you in turn provide behavior specific praise. You say, wow, great job remaining in your seat this entire lecture. I'm so proud of you, great job. And the student goes, oh, this is what they want. I just got, that provides attention to the student, it helps them to know what exactly the teacher is looking for. And most likely after the teacher says that, that student's going to continue sitting in their seat. It's going to increase that behavior. So that's an example of positive reinforcement. I'm going to skip through this one. A couple other examples that you can use in an applied classroom. So a student could receive, let's say, a piece of fruit or some kind of food for completing a task. Great job working on your assignment. Or you could just come around the classroom and hand out goldfish for good behavior. Oh, good job sitting in your seat. And then sometimes even if you only give it to a few at a time, you work your way around throughout the class, students are thinking, oh, if I do this, she's going to bring around that snack or the sticker or the token, whatever it might be. Also, a conditioned reinforcer just means it's something that doesn't have value on its own until you make it have value. So yellow slips of paper provided contingent on good behaviors. So once again, instead of handing them a goldfish or something that they can immediately consume, maybe you go around and the students that get a yellow sticky note on their desk, as if they're doing good things, if they're sitting appropriately, if they're not talking out in class, you just walk around and put that yellow sticky note there. And at the end of class, whoever has one gets 5 extra minutes at recess. So if you were to just hand me a yellow sticky note, I would think, what in the world does this mean? But if you attach it to meaning, then it becomes a reinforcer. Another example would be lunch with the teacher because you completed all of your homework. For example, if you have a student who needs a lot of attention and really, really is trying at their best and they interrupt the class to get your attention, or they maybe sometimes do a negative behavior to get a hallway conversation, a way to prevent that from happening is just say, all right, if you complete your assignments for today and you do them without talking out or without whatever negative behavior you're trying to change, you could say, if you're able to not do such and such behavior, I will have lunch with you today. So if they're needing attention, that's something that's going to be reinforcing to them. And then also potential free time. That's a very popular one for elementary and high school and middle school. If you finish your work early and make it sure it's correct, you can have 10 minutes extra at recess. We'll extend our lunch today. I'll write you a note so you can go work with the gym teacher. I made an arrangement. So those are all examples of positive reinforcement. So just remember, Positive in this case does not equal good. It just means you're adding something. You're giving them something, and that's what makes it positive. And you're adding or giving them something to increase the behavior. All right, let's move on to this one. So a couple other examples. I just wanted to reiterate these because this is so crucial, and you will be tested on this on the final exam too, in probably a more in-depth way than you are even asked on the study guide. So make sure you get these concepts now, because otherwise you're gonna have to go back and watch this again later on, and this could save you some time. So negative reinforcement. Like we talked about before, nagging is an example. So basically a stimulus is removed as an effect of a certain behavior. And then there's a likelihood of this behavior occurring again. It makes it greater. So this mom, like I talked about before, is nagging, nagging, nagging. You didn't clean up your shoes. Why is your stuff here? This also works if you're married or you have a certain relationship. If you're continuing to nag, it could work in your benefit, but it also can be a detriment. So I don't recommend being the person that's nagging. It's just an example of if someone's coming at you and nagging, then it's more likely that just to stop them from doing it, you're going to engage in the behavior that they want. So she's saying, clean up your room. Why don't you clean? Why are your shoes still here? You're like, okay, I'm going to put it in the closet, just to get her to stop saying that. So that's an example. She's getting the behavior she wants, but you're also trying to avoid what she's doing. So a classroom example would be a teacher submits their grades, which is a behavior, so they will not get in trouble by the principal. Also, this could work in our situation, right? So you hopefully are submitting your assignments and things that you're doing so that you don't have any consequences. You don't want points taken off, or you don't want to lose 50% of your points if you're way off on getting your assignments in. You want to be on time so that you can get all your points. That's an example technically of negative reinforcement. It's really ingrained within the school system. So you do something that a teacher or your students will do something that you want them to do so that they can avoid getting in trouble. It's all about they're avoiding something, but it's giving you what you want. This, it's funny, it hopefully doesn't confuse you, but this says when I give him work and he starts crying, I give him a sensory break. Plot twist, the function of the behavior is escape. You have been reinforcing it all along. And obviously no, so for those of you who are Star Wars fans. So it can also work against us, because if we use it inappropriately, the students are doing that for us. The student is crying and crying. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Could you please quit crying? So you say, okay, go take a break. And that's what the student wanted you to do. So they're getting what they wanted. And in return, you are avoiding dealing with the crying or the screaming or the hitting or the biting. You're just like, okay, go in the other room, go to timeout, go to the principal's office. This is an example of negative reinforcement. It's somebody's escaping something and the other person is getting what they're wanting, is basically what's happening. An example in the classroom, once again, is of negative reinforcement. The teacher says, Jane, what's 2 plus 2? And that's the antecedent. Remember, antecedent, behavior, consequence. The antecedent is being asked a math question. The student says, I don't know. And that's the behavior. And then over here, the teacher just avoids it because they're thinking, oh, I don't want to engage in this conflict. So they avoid the situation and they say, okay, Billy, what is 2 plus 2? The teacher calls on someone else, which is exactly what this student wanted. So she's going to continue to say, I don't know, if it works, so that she doesn't have to answer. Okay. It's another good example. So if you have kids, you'll notice this as well. You're basically trying to get away from something you don't like. The scream until daddy stops the car. The child is screaming and screaming and screaming, and the dad's like, oh my gosh, I know that they want ice cream, so I can't take it anymore, stop screaming. So they stop by Dairy Queen so that the screaming stops. The child gets what they want, the other person avoids a situation they don't like. So you can see the theme. That's exactly what negative reinforcement is. Okay, so we've gone through two: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Now we have positive punishment. And once again, these four techniques are ways that you can deal with behaviors in the classroom. You just have to figure out what is most effective for you and what is going to work according to the function of the behavior that is present. Okay. So positive punishment, you are adding something to decrease the behavior. Remember, adding to decrease. We talked about overcorrection a bit in the other one, so you probably get the point of that by now. So nice picture. Only 54 more times before your positive practice is over. So you're pretty much having them practice something over and over and over again until either the behavior you don't like is gone and that they've learned a new and better behavior. Just like they slammed the door and you say, okay, come back here. You need to practice shutting the door appropriately. So you have them shut the door nicely, shut the door nicely, so many times that they're like, I never want to slam the door again so that I don't have to practice like this. So then they know exactly how you want that done. Another example here is response blocking. This is a way that you can do positive punishment, especially in situations where students begin to emit problem behaviors that could turn physical. And of course, when I mention this, it's only for things that are, I mean, they're not so aggressive that they're going to cause major damage and harm to you. That's usually a role in the school called restraint. You have to be trained in restraint management, but typically not every teacher is. So response blocking is just, let's say you have a small child in elementary school and they look like they are about to hit another student, or they just are about to hit you, or just some kind of movement that is inappropriate. So instead of just letting them do it, you can hold, I wish I had another person here right now to model this for us. If we were in class, I would have you all practice these things and act them out because that's more fun, but we're not in that situation. So response blocking, you would, like the student, like you can see in this picture, you would just hold your hand up. If whenever you do response blocking, the thing that's important is that you don't close your fist. That's a really big thing, because you don't want to get into a situation, even if you slip or if you accidentally, or they move quickly, you don't want to look like you're punching them. Okay, so that, please don't do that. Response blocking is typically an open-handed, just literally blocking the path. So if this is the student who's about to hit and the student's on this side and I'm coming over, I'm just going to hold my hand here steady so that they can't get to them. Okay, so just like they're doing down here, she has closed hands or is grabbing them. I don't recommend that in this day and age. So open hand, just block it so that they can't get past your arm. Okay, that's response. You're adding something to prevent them from doing a behavior you don't want. That's what that means. Obviously, you can, positive punishment, you can add something they don't like to decrease a behavior. Other examples, and like in all educational settings and in classes, we're always going to tell you, especially in a classroom setting, don't administer anything that's highly non-preferred unless it's absolutely mandatory. We do know that it would stop the behavior, that it could work, but it should be reserved for extreme circumstances or life-threatening. So an example that you might think about is spanking, or some parents will just hit their kid or spank. I don't advise that. Especially in a classroom setting, you will have a lawsuit at your hands. So when I'm talking about this, it's adding something they don't like. Previously in research, this is where people got in huge trouble, and positive punishment doesn't have the greatest reputation because people used to use shock, or like if you think of a dog collar, a shock collar, they add, which is positive, the term up here, add something to decrease the behavior. You shock the dog and then they stop barking or they stop doing whatever. We're not advocating for that at all. I just want you to know that those things are positive punishment, but due to the poor use of shock therapy or abuse or different things that got out of control in former days in education, they are very sensitive about that. So just wanted to make that clear. The last one that is on our list of the 4 options is response cost. So this is actually, negative punishment. So negative, as we said, means you're removing something to decrease, which is punishment, decrease the behavior. All right, so I've said that 1,000 times. I'm reiterating it on purpose because I really want you to get that literally, if you know those substitute words for each of the 4 strategies for behavior, you can just substitute them. So you could say remove something to decrease behavior. That's translating basically. So examples of negative punishment. Response cost is 1. And basically what you're doing is removing some amount of reinforcement or something they like to decrease that behavior. So this is very common to us in this world. I'm sure if you've parked in the wrong place at some point in your life, you've gotten a parking ticket, right? So they're removing your money, which remember negative means remove, removing your money to keep you or decrease the behavior of parking in the wrong spot. So that's response cost. We've all experienced it. So maybe you're in a classroom setting and the students, I don't always love this model because I think students should be able to earn things, start out at 0, just like we do with our paychecks. You start out at 0. If you do a good job that month, you get a paycheck, right? But sometimes, especially in a classroom setting, people do this backwards. They give them 10 points at the beginning of class. This is response cost. Give them 10 points at the beginning of class. If they do something wrong, you take a point away, right? Token systems are an example of this. You can earn tokens, but they also can be taken away. It's the taken away part that makes it response cost. Just basic things that, the government works that way. They take your money all the time. So you know what I mean. Parking tickets are an excellent example. Token economies, you pass out points for doing good, but response cost would be, okay, you hit your neighbor and you're not going to recess today. I'm taking 3 tokens away from you. Okay. Timeout is also, I mentioned this before, an example of negative punishment. And you're removing them, which negative, remember, means remove, removing them from something they like or people that they're playing with or a toy that they are engaged with, and removing them from it and placing them in just a quiet area or by themselves. Obviously, if you're a teacher, please do not put them in a timeout situation where you can't keep your eye on them, because that will also be heading towards a lawsuit. So I just want to make that clear. I know parents sometimes will say, go to your room and you can't see them, but as a teacher, you can't do that unless you have somebody with them. Please keep in mind though that timeout is a very inappropriate use. If you have a student using escape maintain behaviors and you do timeout or go to the principal's office, you are reinforcing that behavior that you don't like. So just like she says down here, if you're given a task you don't want to do, just start crying. They'll send you straight to the thinking chair, which is timeout. It's like a vacation from work. So students will work you. I'm sure we've all done this at some point where you know exactly how much you can get away with. You think about what you want, think about what the student wants, and then you're going to find out really quickly what's happening. So only use timeout if it's for attention, a function of attention, because that will work and be hard for them or tangible. If you remove them from the item, it's a tangible function of behavior, or if it's attention function of behavior, both of those functions will work with timeout. Like I mentioned a second, I'm just going to reiterate it. If it's an escape maintain behavior and they're trying to get away from something, putting them in timeout is just giving them what they're wanting, and it's reinforcing that. behavior you don't want, okay? If you have questions about that, write it down, take notes, let me know, and I'll be glad to help you. Okay, so this is, I believe, on your reading guide. I'm not going to go through it here because you're not with me, so that's why we have reading guides to check for comprehension. I need an example from you. You can use the types that I have given you, but give me an original context of how that could be used in the classroom. You could say, give a student name. You could say how you've seen it happen in your experience. Maybe, if you've been in a practicum at some point, if you've been at your house, that you've seen your brother or sister do it, your parents, you've seen someone in school. If you've thought, wow, I've seen this actually happen before, give me an example of what that looks like in that scenario. And that's what I'm wanting on your reading guide, just to make sure you're understanding what it means. Okay. All right. And I know I've said this 1,000 times, but repetition, it's almost like that overcorrection tool, where you add something to increase the behavior you want. I am adding multiple statements here to increase the behavior that I want, which is for you to know this. All right, so 3 functions of behavior: gain access to a tangible, preferred activity, attention, and escape. That should be tattooed inside your mind, okay? You will never want to forget this when you start teaching. So before I go into the next section, I'm going to just make 3 short videos so that you can watch them whenever you get time. But ask yourself as a teacher, do I know? So let me back up a second. Ask yourself as a teacher, when you see a problem behavior, here's what you need to do. You see something's going wrong. And a lot of times as teachers, since we're moving so fast, we don't even acknowledge that until we're just fed up, right? We think, Tommy speaks out every day and I just can't take it anymore. At that moment, it's usually when we recognize there's a problem. So instead of just talking about it and getting mad and just yelling at the student, think for a second, just stop and think, okay, what is the function of, like I said, Tommy's behavior? And how do I know? If you don't know, that's when you start collecting ABC data. You make the problem behavior the B, and then you go right in for A, just like you're going to do in your reading guide. What happened before the behavior? What happened after? And you can make a chain of those, right? So you can do A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. And if you start to see that there's a common pattern going on and you're like, oh, every time I give this assignment, they hit somebody and I send them out. I'm finally realizing that I'm reinforcing that behavior and that's why they keep doing it. So I need to come up with a new strategy. Okay, that's why you do it. And then here, you also want to ask yourself, are my strategies or my intervention that I'm using, is it making the problem behavior decrease or increase? If I want the student to stop hitting and I've decided that sending them to the principal's office is my intervention, but they keep doing it every day and they keep coming back and doing it again in your class tomorrow and the next day, whatever you're doing is not working. And that probably means you have the wrong function of the behavior. So you might think, oh, I'm sending them out of the room and the behavior is increasing and reinforcing it. So that means it's probably either attention or tangible. And I need to do another strategy here, okay? I wanted to know, and I'm not going to delay long on this, but I did want you to know that the antecedent, the reinforcement does affect the antecedent. This terminology is not a huge deal to me. There's the SD and S delta. But the main point that I want you to know is if you get a certain reinforcement, you start to learn a pattern, right? Think about if you had, let's say you had 2 parents, or maybe you had 2 teachers in the same classroom, whatever the scenario is. If you ask one teacher to let you go to the bathroom, they say yes every time. If you ask the other teacher that you need to go to the bathroom, they say, no, you need to wait until instruction's over, you need to hold on, right? So if the consequence to you asking, may I go to the restroom, for this teacher is, sure, go ahead. and the consequence for this teacher says, no, you need to wait, who are you going to ask, right? You're going to ask the teacher who says yes every time. So keep in mind that the reinforcement that you provide is also part of the antecedent. So if you allow certain things, if you give in to certain things, if you're always saying yes, and you allow things to happen that maybe lets them slide by a lot, they're going to ask you, and they're going to continue that behavior with you more than they would any other teacher. So to put this in educational terms, this actually happened at our school quite a bit. My classrooms typically, I had some behavior issues. I was in a behavioral school, okay? So it's bound to happen. But I would have a student in my classroom and they were working well, they were doing their work, they were on time because I set up some strategies for them and it was working. And another teacher came to me and said, I heard that this student does really well in your class, but every time they come to my class, they won't do their work, they come late, they're not doing what they're supposed to. So with me, I have a very strict rule, and I say, this is what you're doing, this is what time you have to come, and if you don't, you lose points, or whatever the rules are, and they know, okay, I can't get away with that with her. But over here, this teacher doesn't have any consequence of maybe points added or taken away, or maybe incentives that are in the classroom to encourage work completion. They don't have any strategy set up at all. So the student is engaging in behavior in their class, but not in mine. So we know that the students are able to do the right things, but they're going to choose to do them according to how you're running your classroom. So I wanted to make that clear as well. Same for a parent might say, how come my child is so good for my husband all of the time, or when I come home he just acts and straightens up, but when I'm here by myself with my child as the mom, the child backtalks or does this and doesn't listen, and I have to say, wait till your father comes home, right? So that student or that child has learned, if I do this with mom, I can get away with it because I push and push and push until she gives in. But my dad, he doesn't. So I listen to him the first time. So does this make sense? Some of you who are parents are really going to, I think you're going to start using some of these strategies with your own children, which will be good practice. But just think about that. It's very true fact. And let me just check real quick. 2 quick things that I also wanted to mention. So all of these principles are so important for you when you go into the classroom, because you're going to start thinking way differently when you see problem behaviors. Reinforcement. Also, motivation affects this reinforcement, just like the antecedent does, right? So motivation, think about this. And I'm not going to even use this iPhone example, even though it is a pretty good one, but you come home and your mom has, let's say it's a kid, or we're just going to think of a kid and a mom, okay? So the kid comes home and is starving, right? Didn't eat very much at lunch, so hungry, and the mom has cooked dinner, it came back from extracurriculars, and the mom says, okay, it's time to eat. And I just lost my train of thought there. The mom says, it's time to eat. And the student says, oh, or the child says, oh, okay, yes, I'm so hungry. And they just start eating, right? They have a motivation of hunger that is driving them to engage in the behavior of eating mom's dinner. On the flip side, let's say that the student's friend gave him a big candy bar at practice, maybe he stayed after for some sports practice, gave a big candy bar, and then the coach brought in pizza and all of these things, and the child still gets home to the same mom in a whole alternate reality, gets home to the mom, and mom says, okay, it's time to eat, I need you to eat your food, and the student says, no, I'm not hungry, I'm not going to eat your food. So the 2 scenarios, the mom wanted him to have a behavior of eating her food, but it depended on the motivation or how hungry that student was. Just like, under which condition am I more motivated to ask for money? If I just got the $1,000 iPhone I wanted, or if there's a new iPhone, but I don't have the money that costs $1,000. Of course, you're going to ask for money only if you need it. So motivation is really key. And keep in mind too that whatever strategies you're using could work for a while, but they might not work forever. So you might find this magical strategy that works for your students behaviorally. You use positive reinforcement. I don't recommend this because teachers use snacks and candy way too much, and that's the go-to instead of, more time at recess or more a preferred task that they want to do. That's better than candy and snacks. But for the sake of my example, if you use positive reinforcement and you're handing out goldfish, and all of a sudden the students are full, and that's what we call satiation. The students are full and they don't want the goldfish anymore. They're going to stop doing what you want them to do because they don't care about it anymore. If they're starving and that you've got some students who don't even get food at home, they're going to do anything, whatever you ask, just to get that goldfish handed out. So keep in mind that one day the strategy might work and one day it might not, just because they're not motivated anymore. So we can see that a lot of times you have to morph your reinforcement strategies according to what the student wants at the time. So it's the same for, you have a reinforcer. If you finish your homework and you're a mom, you finish your homework, you get to play Minecraft for 20 minutes. But let's say all of a sudden Minecraft's not cool anymore and the kids don't care about Minecraft. Then they're not going to finish their homework because they don't care, right? That's the same about with us. If I never put any grades, and if I said, okay, go read that textbook chapter, even though I told you not to, your motivation has dropped tremendously. What you would have probably done last week reading the chapter, you won't do this week because I have no points attached to it anymore. So your motivation to do it, out the window, right? So motivation is everything when it comes to getting people to perform the tasks or do the things you want them to do. Keep in mind too that when you are implementing reinforcement, which is adding something to make the behavior either increase or decrease, it needs to be immediate. Because if you are reinforcing, especially young children, and you say, wow, great job on that assignment, you could either immediately give them something like a sticker or something that will tell them, good job. And then when you get 5 stickers, you get to pick some treat out of the bag, or you get to, we get to have extra lunchtime today. That's immediate. You're giving something as soon as you say, good job, or positive reinforcement. Let's say on the flip side that you tell the student, let's say Landry, you say, Landry, you did such a good job reading that sentence. I'm going to give you some extra recess time today in the next hour. But 45 minutes later, Landry has a huge meltdown, and the meltdown is so extensive, but you promised that you'd give extra recess time because that sentence, you did such a good job on your reading assignment, but you waited so long in between the time when you gave the reinforcement and the time that you administered it, that in between there are lots of opportunities for problem behaviors to occur. So Landry had this huge meltdown, and if you give that student the extra recess time after the huge meltdown, you could be reinforcing the wrong behavior. You're basically, the student, the only thing they're thinking is, oh, I just had a meltdown and I got free extra time. Maybe if I have more meltdowns, I'll get extra time. See how that happens? So if you don't give something specifically like a sticker or a token, something immediate to say, okay, here's your token. When you get 5 of these, you can get that free time, and this is exactly why you got it. If you have a meltdown in between, I'm taking a token from you. So that's a better system than just saying something and waiting in case problem behaviors occur, okay? All right. hope all of that makes sense so far. One of the last things I wanted to mention, and I think we'll head to the next segment after this. Remember too that there are some instances where delayed gratification is okay. And especially with older kids and teaching them slowly how to get to this point. And typically that can come in the form of, you could teach them just like with money. If you have $5, you could either, oh, that's exactly, okay. I know I'm making this up as I go, this example, but I like it. So if I have $5 and let you know how people go to Chuck E. Cheese or Malibu Jacks or whatever people have around, and you get those little tickets, right? So let's say you played a couple games, but you have more money to spend and you get 5 tickets and you're like, oh, I'm going to go spend this right now. And you get a little tiny tic-tac toy, right? Like something super small. Or you could wait and collect those coins and wait longer and get something bigger. So you can teach students how to do that through some kind of a token economy or fake classroom money system. That's totally fine. But for no immediate consequence for the behavior is apparent. That's what a rule-governed behavior. That happens when the response consequence delay is greater than 30 seconds. Keep in mind, this is what we go by. So my paycheck as a teacher or my other job or whatever I'm doing is a rule-governed behavior. Not every time I teach a class, they don't hand me however much money, right? I don't always, as soon as you turn an assignment, hand you an immediate grade. You know I'm going to grade it eventually. You know you're going to get a grade by the end of the class. So you know it's coming. It's kind of a system. Same with my paycheck. They don't pay me after each lecture that I give, right? They pay me just like you probably get paid at your job. Every 2 weeks, every month, something like that. So I know I'm still motivated to work every day and every week because I know at the end of the 2 weeks or end of the month, I will get a paycheck because it's a system and I know it's true. So that's the difference between the immediate reinforcement, having that, versus having something that's longer, should be a rule or something that you know is coming. Okay. Let me know if you have questions. I threw a lot at you. We walked through the 4 different types of ways that you can manage behavior. We walked through some of the, idiosyncrasies of behavior management, things that you should watch out for that are not always true for every situation. So keep this in mind, and I think it's going to prove very helpful to you. I hope it's eye-opening. Practice some of these things that I'm talking about on your, you could tell them or not tell them. Think about things that your roommate does and think, oh, what's their function of behavior? And you don't want to get to the point where you're psychoanalyzing people, but just for the sake of this week, it would be kind of fun to see if you notice some new things that you didn't notice before, or maybe you're tutoring a student or working in a classroom or at your job, maybe your family. So try some of this. See if you notice anything interesting that you didn't think about previously. All right, have a, well, might not be a full grade week. I got one more section left to do, but I will be seeing you here shortly.